All right, ladies and gentlemen, hello and welcome back once again to the only coast to coast radio show in the US of A that's all about the information economy. It's time for Inside Analysis. Yours truly, Eric Kavanaugh, here with an all star cast, some good buddies on our call today. We'll be talking with Aaron Wilson of Athena Solutions. They are a strategic consultancy systems integrator. They do a lot of data governance, a lot of data warehousing, master data management. Although these days they say mastering data because MDM apparently is a bad word now. So they say mastering data. Everyone understands that. We'll also be hearing from Jim Smith of Qlik. In fact, the webinar we just did a moment ago, which you can hop online to insideanalysis.com to find, was all about the Associative Engine in Qlik, which is very interesting stuff. We're going to talk about that and what it means and why it's special. The title for our show is Insight by Association, Exploration Without Constraints. And then last but not least, our good buddy David Linthicum is online. He's been doing a lot of work. This guy's been around. I mean, he did some work for NASA. He's doing agentic AI work these days that refers to AI agents. We may even talk about that on our next show, where we're going to be featuring Kindi, a very interesting large language model tool. And of course, these large language models, ChatGPT, Gemini, Claude, they've taken the market by storm, but they have certain use cases. There are times when you want to use those to do interesting things like code generation or text generation, but they're not really analytic engines in the traditional sense. So we're going to talk about what that all means and basically help you figure out what does your business need? What kind of solution will make sense for you? So first, I'll just throw out a few comments. We did talk about the associative engine in Qlik, and I remember getting a first briefing on that, gosh, probably 15 years ago by a good buddy of mine, Donald Farmer. And you want to talk about when something just clicks, man. I watched, I was like, wow, that's cool. So what it does, and this goes all the way back to the genesis of the tool, to the kernel, is it'll automatically show you visually relationships between entities, between concepts, like products that you sell and customers you sell them to, for example. Pretty important information. You're not really going to see that as readily if you're looking at rows and columns. I mean, you can look in Excel and build different graphics and different things to visualize data, but how nice is it to just see the relationships right out of the box? It's very, very important stuff because the whole process of discovery requires thinking through and understanding what you're looking at. You know, in a previous show we did in this series with Ala Zakin, also from Athena Solutions, she had this great quote where she said, in order for data to be an asset, it must be understood. I was like, hmm, good point. If you don't understand the data, it's not an asset. And in fact, it might be a liability if you don't understand what that data is telling you. This gets back to a concept called data literacy, which is very much in conversation these days for good reason, because now we have all this data. You know, 20 years ago, really only the Fortune 2000 companies could afford to build an enterprise data warehouse. It took 6 months. It cost 10 or 20 or $30 million. It was a huge effort. It took a lot of time. You want to talk about time to value? We're talking years to get to value. Well, that's just not even acceptable anymore. You cannot, no one is going to approve a 3-year project in data that'll only provide value a year or two later. There's no chance of that happening. And luckily, it doesn't have to happen. The new technologies these days and the old technologies that are modernized, they allow you to get value very, very quickly from your data. And that's what you need. It's a very fast moving environment these days. Just think about the internet and all the stuff that you could buy on the internet. Think about all the data that's out there. Think about data science. There's this whole data science industry, and we've talked on this show before. I've marveled, in fact, that the data science teams in large organizations often don't interact with the data warehousing teams, which, in my opinion, makes exactly zero sense. You want these folks talking to each other, but it's very common that they don't. So, on this show, we're going to try to hash through some of these issues and really explain why this associative engine is so important for analysis. Because, again, anytime you're doing what's called decision support, that's one of the older terms,
Mhm.
you're trying to get information that helps you make better decisions about where to spend your money, where to spend your time, how to hire, whom to hire, where that person will fit in an organization. All these questions can be aided and should be aided with data and analysis. And the data, again, from an analytical perspective, has no value until you've analyzed it. Right. And just very quickly, last comment. One very cool thing about all these large language models hitting the markets today is that most of the analytics world deals with structured data. So data that's in relational databases, data that's in tables, rows, and columns, being able to analyze that and get some value. One cool thing about large language models, we'll pick this up in our final show in a couple weeks on the 29th, is that it analyzes unstructured data too. Text, documents, Word documents, PowerPoint presentations, some really, really cool stuff in there to get context to help better understand the numbers. And so with that, let's bring in our first guest, Aaron Wilson of Athena Solutions. Welcome back to the show. You're in the industry with us and you've done some pretty serious work in financial services. You got to get those numbers right. What do you think about the importance of an associative engine for being able to analyze data?
Yeah, I mean, I think it can't be overstated, and I think one of the interesting thing is, and there are people at Qlik who I'm sure would say this, is that it's not it's not that complicated a concept, but many people don't really understand it. And I think it goes to Jim's point about how usually the emphasis is on, okay, how many cool visuals can we generate from this thing, or oh wow, there's the pop that comes out of, like, a visual that maybe nobody's ever seen before, and which is that's great, but it's very important in this transition in terms of making it not just a visualization tool, making it a tool for analysis, because the associative engine is key to that. It's you know Query-based tools are very good, just like I said, if you know where you're going. But to be able to explore, I think the associative engine is I mean, it's huge because it shows you all the data in front of you. It shows you contextual data, things you might not be thinking about that you didn't set out to look for in the first place.
Yeah, and in fact, before I throw it over to Jim, I'll just throw it back to you for a comment on this, Aaron. Jim had a great quote in the webinar we just did where he said, this tool will give you answers to questions you ask and answers to questions you didn't ask, right? Which is great because it helps shape the contours of your understanding. And that's important stuff. It's just like being able to visually assess a situation. Like if you're a security guard at a rock concert or something, you want to have a good view so you can see everything that's happening. Yeah, you may want to keep an eye on this person or that person, but you also want to have the ability to see the whole room. And I think that's what this does is it gives you the ability to see not just one answer to a question you're asking, but the broader context. And then when you kind of move around and select and deselect, whether it's products or services or regions or individuals or financial amounts or whatever it is, everything changes. In that discovery process, it's a learning experience. I mean, you got to try hard to not learn something by engaging in that process, right?
Uh, Completely. And I think, you know, the idea really, SQL queries aren't necessarily designed for this kind of analysis. You're continually either drilling down or moving back up the ladder. But the idea of being able to have all the data in front of you and explore, I mean, I can tell you that users really like this because, for a user, once they get their hands on the data and they get their hands on the visualization tools, the next thing they want to do is explore it. They want to do analysis. And in that sense, if visualization, maybe part one over the last few years, has been democratizing these graphical capabilities along with access to the data. In a sense, what Qlik's able to do is democratize analysis, which is extremely powerful.
Yeah, that's a good point. We have a couple good comments from our audience members too. I'll bring them in probably later on in this segment, but let me throw it over to Jim Smith from Qlik. I mean, you've talked about how this goes back to the kernel. This was an idea someone had a long time ago, and I'm always fascinated by the kernel of a technology, right? Because you have some idea, you're trying to address a particular issue. And I mean, I have to say, I think that this associative engine is central to the capacity of really exploring data very quickly and getting that value, that time to value way, way down. What do you think, Jim?
Yeah, first of all, Eric, thanks for having me on. Absolutely. I mean, two things about this associative engine that really brings value to organizations right away. The first is the fact that, when you're looking at your visualizations, when that data is in memory, and you start to slice and dice it as an end user, what you don't want to do is you don't want to see a bunch of progress indicators saying, oh, you just asked for this very complex piece of information. Why don't you just wait 5 minutes as I go to these different sources to get that information? So that's the first thing that kind of Qlik helps with, is kind of that immediate access to the information you ask about. And then the second thing, and we kind of saw this in the webinar, if you were able to attend that, is this whole concept of green, white, and gray. That's kind of the color scheme that Qlik uses when a business user is starting to filter the information. Well, that clearly allows a user to get smacked in the face with what they're asking for and what they want to see and what they don't want to see. And I've done a lot of demos of the technology over the years, and it's amazing when you show an organization this technology with their data. People are always on the edge of their seats. You know, when they come in and they're sitting back, and then you can kind of go and start clicking on their information, and they see those gray values, which I refer to as kind of the golden nuggets. Those are the things you didn't ask for. The users of the data just get very excited. Sometimes it's happy excitement. Sometimes it's not so happy excitement because they're seeing things they don't want to see, but they're always able to see them above and beyond what they would have in other solutions.
And the key is the context, right? Context, and this is actually one of the real challenges with artificial intelligence is what context does it have? What is the context window people talk about? That's something that has to do with both time and dimensions. And if you played with these large language models, you'll know if you give a very, very complicated task, it'll sit there and think for a while, and then sometimes it'll go, "Oh, I'm a language model. I can't figure that out." That's where it just defaults. Now, sometimes that's a guardrail. Sometimes it was just too complex, and it doesn't want it to do that.
Yeah.
Although I heard something very strange that we'll just pick up later maybe, but some guy told me that if you tell ChatGPT that Gemini can do something, it'll work harder. That's what someone told me. I was like, really? If that's true, that's crazy. But kind of back to you, Jim, the context is so important. In that webinar we did earlier, you were showing an example of snack items that a company is selling, and you can see one of the dimensions that's visible is what kinds of customers get that, like grocery stores and
Yep.
schools and other things. And there was a gray area at the bottom, which was hotels, for example. So the beauty from an analytical perspective is that right away the user sees, wait a minute, we're not selling these to hotels. How come? And that's a question you ask. That's a golden nugget, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And we see that all the time. The example I get excited about is when we go in and you start showing this to, let's say, a sales organization. You're showing it to sales reps or sales managers. And a lot of times when you're using that kind of scenario, you always say, okay, the company wants to see the top reps or the top products. So they use a tool like Qlik to show that information. And with Qlik, what always comes out is, oh, well, here are the reps that aren't selling. Here are the products we're not selling at all, and we're not selling them into this region. They never thought about that information as far as, kind of the context they were looking at. They were looking for top reps and top products. And what they're getting now is reps who aren't selling, products that aren't selling, regions that aren't selling, which they would not see with other solutions. And that actually changes the query or the question that they started to ask initially, which always gets them excited.
Yeah, that's an excellent point, and I'll bring in David Linthicum here to comment on this. David, we're kind of talking about the null set, right, where there's nothing, and you don't typically search for that. I mean, I've heard lots and lots of analysts over the years say, look, if you really want to explore your data, look for the zero values, look for the null values. Where is there nothing? Because that could be interesting, but that's not terribly intuitive, right? You want to look, as Jim was suggesting, oh, who are the top selling salespeople? That's good information, but it's also very good to know that we're not selling any of these products or in any of these regions, and these guys aren't doing anything. Like, wait a minute, let's call a meeting, right? What do you think, David?
No, I think it's absolutely right. I mean, give you an example. Had a ceramics manufacturer that was concerned about the quality of the ceramics going down at certain times, and they couldn't figure it out. They looked at the quality of the suppliers. They looked at the quality of the goods that went into it ultimately, and at the end of the day, it was related to environmental factors within the factory. When the humidity was up to a certain amount of time, that's when the errors started to occur, and they lost lots of money in making these happen. So, looking at ultimately how information relates to other information without an intuitive understanding and how they relate. In other words, these are previously unrelated things that come together and then they
Right.
make sense. And sometimes that's going to be the ability to look at null sets and other operations within certain data sets and how they relate to certain systems. When I see data missing, that's data unto itself. That doesn't mean that the data is missing. This means that's a data point that I need to explore. Why is the data missing? And ultimately, what it means that the data is missing. And so
Mhm.
in this case, they had a certain margin of errors and a certain defect rate that went up. And they were looking for correlations between it and looking at things that were unrelated. And ultimately, that left a huge amount of value. They saved huge amounts of money. In some instances, they saved a whole product line.
That's amazing. And what's so interesting is it's atmospheric, right? Probably no one going in thought for a second, hey, maybe it's the humidity until you started looking at the data and you're like, oh, wait a minute. Every time this happens, the humidity goes up. So that's a classic aha moment that can change a whole business and save, as you suggest, a whole product line. It's something, and I'm always fascinated by these revelations that are outside the sphere of what you were considering, right? And I think that's one of the problems with structured data is that we're trying to force the world into this structured model where it doesn't always fit perfectly, right, David?
Right, and absolutely, and also it comes down to the people are trying to look for AI to save them in this area, and it won't unless the
Right.
AI system is going to be trained in the information. It can't make the correlation. So everything dependent. All an AI system does is a mirror of the data that's used to train it, and so if we're not training it with all of the correlated data points and the ability to kind of look at all these unrelated systems because they're not trained because the people who train the data don't know that they're related, then you can't really kind of uncover the value in that data. So, and looking at the webinar that we just went through, and that was kind of an aha moment in me that the ability to leverage data in new dynamic ways is the ability to find value in information that previously wasn't there. And that's really what understanding data analytics is all about and how it brings value back to the business. And I wish more businesses would see this and kind of understand where the value is.
Yeah, that's just an excellent point. And seeing is believing. And one of the promotions I sent out for this event was seeing is knowing. When you can see something, the visual metaphor is a very powerful one because you can see disparities, you can see connections. And when you can start to play with that, especially moving things around, like I'm a huge fan of slider bars. If you slide over time, back and forth, where does something happen? Well, it's kind of important to know where something happens. But folks, don't touch that dial. We'll be right back. You're listening to Inside Analysis. Okay, folks, back here on Inside Analysis, talking all things associative analytics. We've got Aaron Wilson with us from Athena Solutions, as well as Jim Smith of Qlik, and our good buddy David Linthicum, an industry analyst, formerly of Deloitte. Now he's on his own doing all kinds of interesting things. And this guy has got answers for questions I haven't even asked yet. So we'll try to get to those at some point in the show. But Aaron, I'm going to throw it back over to you to comment on to me, and we've talked about this for many years, that DM Radio, our other show, is in year 17. So we've been going a long, long time. And I'm always amazed by the importance of the fluidity of your experience with data. In other words, you can't just click something and run a report and come back, on Monday to see what, I mean, you can do that, but it's not a whole lot of value in that. What you really want is this experience where you can play around with things, select, deselect, change, maneuver, bring in different dimensions. And that experience, especially if it's in memory, and that's the way it's designed in Qlik, that fluidity is crucial to sort of match the analytical process of the brain. What do you think, Aaron?
Yeah, I'd say that's definitely true. I mean, one of the things that at Athena that is kind of near and dear to our hearts. I mean, we have a product that I know you've heard about called the Data Analysis Sandbox, right? So this idea of exploratory analysis and what our product does is basically brings in a semantic layer over top of all different types of data, different sources, different formats, and allows you to essentially do an exploratory process in kind of in the same way as Qlik, the Qlik Associative Engine does. But I definitely think that there's a demand out there for it. I think that, it's really, again, I think that once you give people the power to get their hands on data and to produce visualizations, it's a short hop from there to they really want to explore it and they want to produce real analysis.
Hmm. It's like a video game. I mean, there's this whole concept of gamifying things to make it fun, to make it interesting. And when you can do that rapid fire analysis, whether it's with slider bars or selecting and deselecting entities and characteristics to look for, whatever the case may be, as long as it's fast, as long as it's real snappy, that's gamification, right, Aaron? What do you think?
A bit. I mean, and that's a really interesting analogy. Of course, I'm of a generation where the analogy isn't lost on me, but it's mostly what I've seen from my kids. But people do like working that way. I think that, you know, the idea of just having the ability to go somewhere just at your fingertips, you know, it's extremely compelling. It's powerful. You know, and if you can increase engagement amongst your users, I mean, that's powerful in and of itself.
I think that's a great point. I'll throw it over to Jim to comment on that. Getting the users to use the data. Right? I mean, if you don't use the data is not being used and it's not generating value, and it might just be a liability. What do you think, Jim?
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And that's one of the things I know what we've been talking about is kind of that analytics type user who goes in there and maybe sees what someone has created for them and then wants to start changing and slicing and dicing. But at Qlik, I mean, there's a whole set of users that don't do that. I mean, you still have users who want to come in the morning and get an email with a PDF attachment with a bunch of rows and columns. And you've got executives who don't really do any slicing and dicing. They just want to get their dashboard, and they don't want to have to go to a separate tool. They want their dashboard to be in the application of choice that they want. So I think one of the things that we always talk about at Qlik is visualizations are great, but you got to get the right data to the right person in the right format.
Right.
And it's not always taking advantage of, let's say, that associative engine. Well, I take that back. It's always taking advantage of the associative engine, but it's not necessarily always interacting, you know, slicing and dicing. Sometimes it's just, hey, I need my information when I need to make a business decision, and I need a tool that it can provide me that data in the format that I want at the time that I want. And again, I think that's something that at Qlik, we do a really good job at providing those different avenues to get the data to the user.
Yeah, and you know, Aaron brought up one of the magic words in his commentary a moment ago. I'll throw it over to you because I think in this environment with the associative engine and just what you've described, you enable analysis of semantics, right? Semantics are very important. And, you know, for example, you could see as a user, wait a second, why is this area down here gray? I know we sell this product. Maybe the semantic engine was wrong. Maybe it wasn't coded properly, or maybe when the data was imported, there was a column missing, for example. I mean, we're starting to see that very adeptly addressed by observability tools that show when something doesn't happen. Because, yeah, hitherto, it's like you would load it in and you just presume it's in there. Is it? I don't know. Let's take a look. But you don't know it's not there until you see that gray. And you're like, wait a minute, why is that gray? It gets back to this golden nugget thing, which I just love. It's the null set. Like, why is this a 0? That shouldn't be a 0. I know that it should be XYZ number.
Yeah.
But that's what helps you get to the answer, but helps you figure out what's wrong in the system, right, Jim?
Yeah, and that's one of the things that I would never sell ClickSense, which is the tool from Qlik, as a data quality tool. There are data quality tools out there. But one of the things that you always run into with this associative engine, when we do, let's say, a proof of concept or just get some sample data from a customer, you can load that in. And sometimes you get great values because they're great values. You didn't sell a product in a particular region. But a lot of times you'll start to get great values because of data quality issues. Now, again, we don't fix it. We kind of highlight it for you and kind of smack you in the face, as I mentioned before, with it, so that you can go back and say, all right, you know what? I've got $250,000 of missing revenue. It's not missing revenue, it's missing data. That sales transaction is not tied to the proper customer ID, and I see that easily in Qlik. So I think you're right there. The semantics of the missing data sometimes is because the data isn't there, and sometimes it's because the data is wrong. And that's what an associative engine can help you see.
Yeah, I'll throw it over to David Linthicum. Figuring out what's wrong, that's pretty important because making decisions based on bad data is a very, very bad idea. You can think that this group of salespeople is doing a fantastic job. In fact, they're not, and you give them all a raise, and then you wind up throwing good money after bad, as they say. So understanding what's incorrect is a huge part of this equation, right, David?
Yeah, it's everything. And most enterprises out there aren't utilizing their data in the correct way, where they're able to find insights into what is incorrect. They can't see what's wrong with their business based on the way that they're currently tracking information. So everything's transaction oriented. Everything is basically entering things into an inventory database and a sales database, things like that. They don't see the forest through the trees in understanding their data. And of course, we went through the whole data warehousing stuff. We were supposed to have analytics to get us into there so we could see the forest through the trees. And now we're moving into AI. And then you look at the utilization of data by most enterprises out there, they really couldn't tell you where the single source of truth is. They couldn't tell you where their business is rising and failing. They couldn't tell you where certain product lines are becoming weakening into the marketplace until another 6 months of data transactions. And so they're missing a huge piece. And I think that a lot of those businesses are just going to fall by the wayside because they can't see where they're steering the ship, and they're
Right.
going to end up running into icebergs.
Yeah. No, that's an excellent point. And Aaron, I'll bring you back in. Our good friend Kate Strachnia from Datacated had a great post on LinkedIn the other day. She said some companies love a single source of truth so much that they have many of them. Right? Which I threw back my favorite quote about standards is the good thing about standards is there are so many of them, right? But we do need to watch out for these things. It kind of gets back to semantics too, right? Understanding. But the whole point is that data literacy itself is an ongoing process. And especially for some mid-sized or large organization, there's going to be a lot of stuff that you don't know and you don't understand about how the business operates. Maybe it's in operations or manufacturing, like the example that David gave. There's a lot to be learned out there, and you want to be learning it. So you have to be using the information and then collaborating with people too. That's another big part of the equation, right? Is don't just use it for your own personal consumption, but use it to start conversations, to ask people about things, to get that collaboration going, because that fuels analysis and it also enables data governance, right? What do you think, Aaron?
Definitely think so. I mean, it ties in with the other part of this series, the series that we're doing with you about data catalog, where the idea of how data catalog can be so important to governance. The idea of, first of all, the more people can get their hands on the data and work with it, the more they can point things out. The more they can find, like you said, problems with the data, maybe problems with the semantics. And offer their expertise and maybe fix problems. Qlik helps in that regard, in the sense that the more people get their hands on the data, the more people get involved, they get engaged, and you have the potential to improve governance, really.
Mm-hmm. Engagement. I mean, you jumped on that a minute ago, Jim. I'll throw it back over to you. Engagement, collaboration. And I've seen this myself. When someone becomes engaged, it's a very powerful thing, and they don't want to let it go. I mean, it's like I've been doing tracked email marketing now for, oh my goodness, 24 and a half years or so, because I have a friend who built a solution in 1999. So I was using it back then.
Mhm.
Once you can see who opens and who clicks, you can't go back into the darkness. I mean, you can't go back into just the spray and pray nonsense. And it's like it's an iterative process. You get closer and closer to the signal, and that's what you want, right? Is signal. You don't want noise. You
Yeah.
want signal. And the more people you get to collaborate, that's engagement, and that gets you somewhere. I guarantee if people are engaged, good things are happening. What do you think, Jim?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the ways that we've always gone to market at Qlik is this whole concept of land and expand.
Yeah.
And really, really what that was all about is Qlik going into a particular business division and showing the power of the solution and getting users in that particular business division very excited about it. And guess what? When a set of business users is excited about things, they'll talk and they'll talk to, their friends at the company, and they'll show kind of the reports that they're using. And then sure enough, another business division says, hey, I want that. I want to be able to do those things that this first business division has been able to do. And I think that just kind of makes Qlik, or any other BI tool. Again, it's not just for Qlik, spread like wildfire in an organization. When users can start to consume data in a way that makes sense for them, everybody wants to do that.
Yeah, that's right. And it's like the snowball going downhill. It gets bigger and bigger. It gets
Mhm.
better. You get more attention focused on it. I'm actually looking, our live studio audience has lots of good comments and quotes. So I'll share those in the break and we'll tackle them in the final couple segments of the show.
Right.
But, David, I'll bring you back in. What else is very interesting here is that like just like a data catalog, we're doing a separate series on that, but obviously it's related. The analysis of data is a galvanizing agent. And when you can look at this stuff and then have meaningful conversations with people, that's very compelling because you're not just asking what's going on. You can see the data, you can see the relationships, and you can call someone and say, "Hey, Bob, I just realized we're not selling any snacks to hotels. Do you know who's responsible for that?" Like, "Oh, let me check." Well, that person actually left the company last year, and we haven't fulfilled that position. There you go. That's the kind of thing you're looking for when you look at this data, right, David?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you got to remember, like the readiness for AI systems is your ability to understand the use of data. And the thing is, if you can't do that, you don't have these insights, these current, even the rudimentary insights, then you have no hopes of leveraging AI to any kind of value purpose. And these are very expensive systems to implement. So people seem to be trying to jump directly from kind of core understanding data semantics and core understanding data analytics into the ability to leverage AI systems to kind of amplify that. And my thing, the readiness there, if you don't have an understanding of what your data is, what it means, and also the power that it's able to be leveraged in your way to derive meaning and derive insights in the data, you have no possibility of moving into AI. And kind of that's a core metric to success.
Yeah, and this is something that I've been on a soapbox talking about, and we have a couple good questions from our audience. For example, one gentleman is asking, do analysts expect that data analysis tools like Gemini, Advanced, and ChatGPT Plus will accelerate data use? Well, David is making a good point there. You need to make sure your data house is in order, and you can actually use these tools. I mean, I've already seen amazing use cases where you give a ChatGPT or a Gemini a significant amount of data and ask it to summarize. The summarize function is fantastic, by the way. It's really interesting stuff. But you can ask it questions. And I think that we're going to head down a road where this nexus of Gen AI and traditional structured analysis will be very, very compelling and very powerful. Not quite there yet, but to David's point, you got to get your house in order. And maybe we've got a minute left in here in this segment. Aaron Wilson, I'll throw it over to you. The key ingredient there to fuse these worlds is data governance, right? And data quality and understanding your data before you go training a model, for example, on all this stuff that you found. First, you want to sort through that stuff and make sure it's good, real good. 30 seconds. Go ahead, Aaron.
No question there. I mean, all kinds of things can happen when you put AI on data that isn't ready for it. I mean, even something, I think a common mistake that people do is there's old data floating around, right? There's data that may have been relevant at one time, but no longer is. And if you train a model on, using calculations and formulas that have been discarded, that's not going to be very helpful to you.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Well, folks, don't touch that dial. I'll be right back. You're listening to Inside Analysis. All right, folks, back here on Inside Analysis, talking to several experts. A wonderful show today. Aaron Wilson of Athena Solutions, Jim Smith of Qlik, and David Linthicum, our industry analyst of the day. And Aaron, you got a question for Jim, so take it away.
Yeah. Well, one of the things we haven't talked about in terms of, the advantages of the associative engine, but I know it's something that Qlik has pointed out in some of their videos that I've seen, for example, is the advantage that you have when you're trying to bring in different data sources. Maybe a data source that comes from outside of, maybe you have a data warehouse where you have certain
Yep.
tables and so forth, and then somebody says, oh, but what would happen if we connected in this whole other, column or this whole other data set and look at those
Yep.
relationships? The associative engine can really help you with that, can it?
It absolutely can. So one of the things about the Associative Engine and what it's been able to do since it was rolled out at Qlik back in the 90s is there is a component of kind of data integration built into QlikSense. Now, again, we have a data integration offering that says, hey, if you've got 100 of data sources and you want to get your information into a data warehouse to be used by business intelligence tool or machine learning tool can absolutely do that. But what's great about Qlik is if you're a smaller organization and you just need to get lots of sources put together, you can go into Qlik and do it directly into that solution. So you could say, hey, I've got a table in Oracle on-prem, I've got a Snowflake table, and I've got someone's personal Excel spreadsheet, and I need to bring those things together. Not only can you make those connections within Qlik, Qlik's got kind of this capability that will look at kind of column definitions, profile the data, and say, yeah, even though this is Excel and this is Oracle, we can put those together based on what we see in the data, and we'll do that for you. And then, you've got users who are able to put together their own reports, even though IT hasn't built out the, the defined data warehouse. They're still allowing users to kind of do that self-service against lots of different sources. Does that answer your question, Aaron?
That pretty much hits it right on the head. Yes,
Okay,
that's where I was going.
cool.
Well, and this is such a good point because, and I'll throw this over to David to comment on, if people still build data warehouses, right? It's not going away. They're going to be data warehouses, I'm pretty sure, forever and ever. LLMs are not going to supplant the data warehouse. Again, it's a different tool. It's text generation. It's great for summarizing things. It's great for getting a consensus about what has been published on a topic. That's really what these LLMs are. They're text generative consensus engines. And it's good for a big part of the process, but the understanding the data and the relationships, that's a separate deal, and it's very, very important. And David, when they were talking about this, I'm thinking to myself, that is really valuable to, in the process of deciding what's going to go into your warehouse, explore that data with Qlik, explore the relationships between things, because that's going to help you figure out what is the optimal set of data that we're going to use to put into this warehouse to fulfill business needs. It's a very important part of the process. What do you think, David?
It's everything. And I think that ultimately that's what's missing in terms of the data analytics as to what the data means and what it can be used for and the kinds of insights that we're looking to get out of the information. So your ability to understand the usage of data and your ability to find value within the data before you start building these things, before you build these analytic tools and data warehouses and things like that, is something that many enterprises are missing. I think 90% of the enterprises out there are grossly underutilizing their data, and the other 10% are minorly underutilizing their data. So everybody's underutilizing their data. And ultimately, the companies that are able to utilize their data for strategic purposes are able to gain insights that are going to provide innovative differentiators for them to accelerate themselves in the marketplace. I truly think in 10 years, we're going to see lots of businesses that have gone under, lots of businesses that have succeeded in a meteoric success. And look at the differentiators there. How do they do it? They're able to leverage data. They're leverage data in the context of analytics, in the context of AI, in something that provides them with a core force multiplier for their ability to take the business. So it's everything.
Yeah, Jim, go ahead.
Yeah, the one thing I wanted to add to David's comment, and we see it a lot at Qlik, is there are some organizations we go out to and they say, okay, yeah, we don't want to look at a data analytics tool yet. We've got this 12 to 18 month project to build the data warehouse, and then we'll come back and look at a business intelligence tool. And I think what we tell customers, I think it's similar to what David said, is use a tool up front that is easy to get started with so that you know what data your users actually want to consume in your analytics environment. And if you can do that quickly and easily, you can go back and make that some of the requirements for your data warehouse project. So in a sense, it's kind of, and I don't mean to use an old term there, but rapid application development. Start with kind of some of the reports, see if they're successful, work that into your data warehouse project so that when your data warehouse project's done, you're actually giving information that users want to see, as opposed to, try to do that all up front in 12 months and then realize you failed and have to go back and change that data warehouse.
Right. That's exactly right. And just to put some meat on the bones here, I'll throw this one over to Aaron. We've got about 4 minutes left in this segment. If you want to know where the value accrues, where it is generated, look at companies that come out with new promotions like we'll sell 3 for a discount of 30%, for example, or buy one now, get one free. Most of those deals are data driven. Someone has crunched the numbers and figured out, aha, if we sell this many at this price point, we'll get this many new customers. And then they test that stuff. I mean, they make sure that's working. So you get your idea, you put it into the market, then you test it. And I mean, those cycle times are coming down and down and down. To Jim's point about rapid application development, new data products are what people are creating. Think insurance companies. I mean, you've done a lot of work in financial services, understanding that you can test these theories out, see how they work, then double down, triple down, offer it in more regions, for example. That's where you actually see the innovations occurring because of the data, right? Aaron, go ahead.
Yeah, I definitely think so. And I mean, that gets to the point of exploratory analysis, right? Because you've mentioned really sometimes you're testing a specific, idea, a specific hypothesis. You've mentioned a couple use cases there, but you also have situations where you don't know ahead of time. I mean, in the promotions case, right? You may have a whole other factor that you could throw into the promotion that could make a big difference in terms of sales, but it could be sitting in front of you, but it could be sitting in the data. And that's the thing where the associative engine might help you to bring in that, that data point that comes, you weren't looking for it, but here it is.
Yeah, and it's all part of this process. It's part of discovery never stops. Discovery is ongoing because market conditions change. You get new products, new services. You're having to adjust pricing. I mean, pricing is one of these things that is really under scrutiny right now. I've been paying close attention to inflationary forces like most Americans are. And I saw a stat the other day that just jumped off the screen at me, which is that juices like orange juice and drinks are up 40%. 40%. And what that tells me is people running grocery stores have figured out, hey, we can inch that stuff up because everyone wants their orange juice, right? It's also why they put it way in the back of the store. So you got to go through everything to get to the orange juice. But Jim, what do you think?
Um, the one thing that you made me think about when talking about that, Eric, was just the fact that when you're using a data analytics tool, it's great to actually see historical performance. You can kind of see all the visuals to say how we've done. What we're seeing a lot of, where people are moving towards, is basically the machine learning capabilities within our product that says, hey, not only do we need to know what happened in the past, we need to know what values are the biggest influencers. And it'd be nice to be able to take those influencers and kind of propagate out what's going to happen in the future. And I don't want to just call it forecasting, because forecasting is, hey, I've got a line, I'm going to draw it through the data points. Where it becomes really helpful is when you can kind of look at that historical information and then say, these are the influencers, and let me change those influencers to see what might happen in the future. And I think with the inflation example you had, that's what we're seeing a lot of people wanting to do with the data analytics tool.
Yeah, that's right. Just understand what are the vectors impacting our business right now. And again, the fluidity of that experience is just crucial because as soon as it stops, as soon as you have to go to IT to get some other query or to get access to some data set or whatever the case may be, like that analytical process is dead. Like it's just over. Maybe you wrote it down. Maybe you'll think about it next week when you come back in the office. But the point is that you want to always enable that fluidity of interaction with data and understanding of the data. And that's going to get you somewhere. Well, folks, we got one more segment coming up, and we have some fantastic questions from the audience today. I'll give our guests a bit of a teaser so they're ready. Some folks are asking about Apache Iceberg and Delta Lake and Hootie, and does Qlik support all these things? I mean, this is this whole movement now, Apache Iceberg in particular, which really took the market by storm and generated tremendous traction. Everyone agreed upon it as a standard. And then Databricks announced that they're buying Tabular, the company that sits on top of it, during the Snowflake convention. So yeah, I don't think that was a coincidence. We'll be right back. You're listening to Inside Analysis. All right, folks, time for the podcast bonus segment here on a fantastic Inside Analysis. We'll be talking to Aaron Wilson of Athena Solutions, Jim Smith of Qlik, and David Linthicum, our industry analyst of the day. We had some fantastic questions today, folks. We'll be sure to pass these along to our presenters if we did not get around to your question. But there are questions about AI, and there are questions also about these new table formats like Iceberg, the Apache Iceberg. Hootie is another one, and Delta Lake, that's the Databricks specific one. And then, of course, Databricks bought Tabular, which sits on top of Iceberg. So first, I'll throw it over to you. Jim, how does that fit into the Qlik world?
Yeah, I mean, at Qlik, we've got, the important thing about an analytics tool or a data integration tool, and Qlik has both of those, is being able to connect to any source and pretty much deal with any target. And because of that, there are hundreds of data sources that we can support both on the analytics side and the integration side. I don't know that I can address those in particular, but I can tell you that we work on adding data sources on a monthly basis. So we're, I believe, rolling out 15 more data connectors on our data integration and data analytics side within the month. So we are really good partners with hyperscaler databases, Snowflake, Databricks. So as those vendors start providing different ways to get access to information, I think you'll find Qlik following along with that support.
Yeah, and David, I'll bring you in. And this open table format stuff is very interesting because what were we talking about earlier? Context and being able to leverage new data sources, new types of data, for example. I mean, one of the challenges is that from an analytical perspective, SQL queries, that's a structured query language. It doesn't deal so well with unstructured data or some other unwieldy sources like JSON and different formats like that. But now with these open table formats, you're going to be able to bring in lots of external data that's going to improve context and really help kind of see the big picture. Of course, you have to know how to do it. But what are your thoughts on all that, David?
It's extremely valuable. I mean, data unto itself, without the context of where it exists and what it means to other data. I mean, like we went into the previous example. In other words, the data of erroneous or errors that occur in production and how it means in the context of other things, other environmental factors that have to come into play. And so your ability to find problems, your ability to understand what the data actually means to the business, other than the data as it exists fundamentally into itself. Everybody likes to do the analysis to what sales data means to sales data. That's meaningless to me. What does sales data mean to demographics? What does sales data mean to the environment? What does sales data mean into social media memes? And are we able to make the correlations, which allows us to adjust the business to actually get the growth that we're looking for? And that's core to what businesses need data to do.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Aaron, I'll throw it over to you for some final thoughts. I mean, it's getting very exciting in the data world. It's a lot less expensive to play around with the stuff than it used to be. There are many more data sources. It's a lot more fluid. I mean, really, it's kind of a golden age for data. What do you think, Aaron?
It is. I mean, it's an interesting time for so many reasons. I mean, the question about open table format, I mean, it shows you that, we're kind of looking at integration challenges all up and down the spectrum. I mean, there's still a lot of legacy on-prem that, as an implementation analyst, you have to be aware of that, but you also have to be aware of these new formats as well. But it is a very exciting time for both AI and analysis. And I think what we've kind of shown here in this show is that analysis, having a human being and actually get curious about the data and go down that exploratory path, you're not going to do effective AI unless you've got people doing that.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I will use the last minute or so here to tease our next show. And our past show is also online. You can hop online to InsideAnalysis.com to see past events that we've done there, radio shows. You can watch the podcast. You can listen to it. We have several new stations that have picked us up recently in St. Louis, in Sarasota, and Tampa, and in Iowa. I got a bunch of new stations out there carrying us. So big shout out to our friends out there. And if you want to be in the show, send me an email, info@InsideAnalysis.com. But our first show is about data fabric. This one is about visualization and Qlik. Next show is going to be about AI. And to points made by each one of these guests, if you want to leverage the power of AI, you need to make sure that your data house is in order. And you want to, and Qlik is great for this, just for the reasons we talked about, for knowing the associations between things, for being able to assess which data fits with which other data set, understanding covariance, which is the key to analytics and to understanding relationships between things. These are all important. They're all part and parcel, but you do want to take your time, right? Don't rush into this stuff. Definitely don't rush into using AI or Gen AI. And frankly, one of the best bits of advice I've heard yet about Gen AI is use it internally first. Be careful about using it externally. There are some great use cases around customer support, for example, but just wait, be careful. Make sure that it's really, really good. You'll hear all about RAG models, it's retrieval augmented generation. Very important. I think that most enterprise data companies are going to have to figure out where they fit in the RAG model. It's going to be huge. I mean, your RAG model is almost like your operating system for Gen AI. It's very important to understand what your anchors of truth are going to be, what your embeddings will be, how you use these tools. But as long as it's for decision support, as long as it's inward focused and inward in nature, you're going to be pretty safe because, and the last thing I'll mention, a great friend of mine pointed this out the other day, Michael Baraz, he'll be on a show sometime soon around data governance or data catalogs. He said, you remember, you don't have to be 100% accurate. The systems we have today are not 100% accurate, but you can find the mistakes. Now you want to be at least 80, 90% accurate, but you can find the mistakes and then go back and address that. And I got to tell you, man, addressing root causes is very, very important. It's going to do a lot of benefit to your organization if you understand where the data quality problems are. How did they get there? How did they get there in the first place? What's the data onboarding process? All this stuff can be addressed in data governance programs, and that's really important before you use AI. With that, we're going to bid you farewell, folks. Thanks so much for your time and attention. Send me an email, info@insideanalysis.com. We'll talk to you next time. Bye-bye.